What began as a quiet conversation between two royal women turned into a moment of raw confession, unseen tension, and seismic implications. Sophie Wessex has remained silent until now, and what she just revealed about her private garden meeting with Meghan Markle could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the royal fracture. What was said, and what was never supposed to leave that garden? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was meant to be just another private royal moment, unmarked, unrecorded, and unseen. But when Meghan Markle requested to meet Sophie Wessex away from official eyes, it wasn't protocol that guided her. It was instinct. She didn't bring aides, she didn't alert press handlers. She asked for one thing: privacy. And in the royal world, that alone signals urgency. The location, a tucked-away garden on an estate rarely spoken about, was chosen with intention. No media access, no long lenses. Just two women, both shaped by the crown, both burdened by its weight, finally alone, without titles or expectation. Sophie Wessex had every reason to decline. As a woman who had spent years earning the trust of the firm, her loyalty was unshakable. She had never stepped out of line, never courted headlines. She was, in every sense, the monarchy's stabilizing presence. And perhaps that's exactly why Meghan chose her. According to a royal aide, Sophie wasn't close to Meghan. But she wasn't hostile either. She was safe. That meeting, once a secret, now ripples across the world because Sophie has done the unthinkable. She's spoken about it. Her words, delivered in a reserved but clearly rattled interview, caught everyone off guard. I kept it to myself, until now. That single sentence sparked a media frenzy, with royal correspondents scrambling to verify the garden meeting's details. But it wasn't just the content of her confession that stunned, it was the emotion behind it. Reports say the exchange between the women was visibly emotional, with moments where both were seen sitting in stillness, their conversation punctuated by long pauses and hushed tones. What began as guarded diplomacy quickly unraveled into something far more human. And now, with the palace refusing to comment, insiders say there is growing panic behind the scenes. They didn't know Sophie was going to speak, said one source, and now they're terrified about what else she might reveal. Because Sophie wasn't just a bystander, she was a witness to the moment Meghan laid bare what she had held in for far too long. And the fact that Sophie has chosen now to speak is a signal in itself. Something has shifted. The carefully constructed silence around Meghan's post-exit truths is beginning to crack. But to understand why this moment matters, we need to go back to the fragile trust between Sophie and Meghan and the secret conversations leading up to it. Sophie and Meghan were never seen as allies. And yet, behind palace gates, they shared whispered glances, guarded moments, and one pivotal promise. What forged this unlikely connection, and what made it so dangerous to reveal? From the outside, Sophie Wessex and Meghan Markle seemed like polar opposites. One, a royal by marriage who had quietly navigated decades within the firm without scandal or spectacle. The other, a global celebrity turned duchess, thrust into a centuries-old system with a voice too loud, a presence too bold, and a story too modern to be contained. But behind the glossy photos and stiff palace protocol, something unexpected began to take root, an understanding. Not friendship in the conventional sense, but something far more fragile and perhaps more powerful: quiet empathy. Sophie, despite her outward composure, had once walked into a world she didn't understand. She too had faced the cold stares, the whispers, the coded disapproval, and though she'd survived by playing the long game, she never forgot what it felt like to be watched but not welcomed. Meghan, for all her charisma, sensed something in Sophie that few others offered her: authenticity without agenda. In her earliest days within the palace, before the tabloid frenzy and the fractures that followed, she reportedly sought Sophie's company during quieter events. Not to complain, but to observe. Not to demand, but to listen. According to palace insiders, Sophie told one aide, almost offhandedly, She reminds me of myself. Once, but louder, more certain. I was never allowed to be that sure. That line meant as a reflection soon became a revelation, because beneath the difference in delivery, the core was the same. Two women, walking a tightrope between visibility and invisibility. Their connection, though discreet, grew in moments the cameras never caught. A glance across a crowded room, a hand offered at the right moment, and one night, everything shifted. A family dinner turned tense after a veiled comment reportedly targeted Meghan's Hollywood expectations. Most stayed silent, but not Sophie. Sources claim she firmly but calmly deflected the insult, redirecting the conversation with a sharpness that stunned the table. Meghan never forgot it. It wasn't a public defense, it was private protection, the kind that resonates deeper than applause. And then came the whispered pact. On a walk around the palace grounds one spring afternoon, Meghan reportedly turned to Sophie and said, "No titles, no sides." Sophie paused, then replied, "We'll speak when no one's watching." A promise made in passing but carried in silence. Years passed, storms rose and settled, and still they hadn't spoken until Meghan reached out. A message delivered quietly, respectfully. And Sophie, true to her word, agreed. That message became the meeting. And that meeting, the garden. It wasn't a casual conversation. It was a reckoning years in the making. And when the moment finally came, the garden wasn't just a meeting place. It became the stage for one of the most emotional confrontations in royal memory. Sophie Wessex has finally broken her silence, and the first words she used sent shockwaves. She wasn't there to apologize. If not to ask for forgiveness, then why did Meghan come? What followed was a conversation that spiraled from calm to confessional and then into something far more revealing. It wasn't a glossy press release or an orchestrated sit-down. And that's exactly why Sophie chose it. The revelation came casually at first, almost as if it slipped out. But the moment those words landed, the room shifted. "She wasn't there to apologize," Sophie repeated, her voice steady but lined with something deeper, fatigue. Not from age or time, but from carrying too much silence for too long. For years, she had guarded the garden meeting like a sacred trust. But now, something had changed. And with her words, the dam finally broke. Sophie explained that Meghan had reached out with no grand motive, no request for reconciliation, no PR agenda. She had something to unburden, Sophie said, carefully choosing her phrasing. The Duchess of Sussex didn't come to clear her name, she came to clear her heart. And in doing so, she narrowed the entire conversation to one person, Catherine. Meghan, according to Sophie, made it clear from the outset she would not speak about the others. Not the king, not Camilla, not even Harry's strained position. This was about Catherine, only Catherine. Sophie recounted a moment that left her shaken not by anger, but by clarity. Meghan had turned to her and said, "I never hated her, but I resented her." The sentence lingered in the air, Sophie said, like a truth no one wanted to touch. Meghan spoke of being measured against an image she could never replicate, not because she didn't try, but because the system had never allowed her to stand as herself. "She had everything I was told I had to earn," Meghan confessed. The words weren't venomous. They were exhausted. And that made them all the more heartbreaking. As Sophie relived that garden conversation, she admitted something unexpected. Meghan shook when she spoke. Not visibly, not performatively, but her voice trembled. Her hands gripped each other tightly. And Sophie, who had seen Meghan dazzle crowds with unwavering poise, realized in that moment she was looking at someone raw, stripped of armor. The woman the world thought they understood had never been less polished and never more real. It was in that vulnerability that Sophie found herself both empathetic and unsettled. Because the truth Meghan was carrying wasn't just emotional, it was systemic. And Sophie knew, in that moment, that this was not just a personal grievance, it was a reckoning. One she was now, unwillingly, a part of. But Meghan's comments about Catherine were only the beginning. What she revealed next shattered even Sophie's resolve. In a moment of rare vulnerability, Meghan allegedly broke down. And what she told Sophie was more than frustration, it was devastation. They tried to break me. What exactly did she mean? And who, in her view, was behind the push to isolate and control? Sophie hadn't expected the shift. The conversation had been steady, tense, emotional but still contained. And then, as the garden air thickened with silence, Meghan's voice cracked. Her hands trembled, and all restraint gave way to something far deeper than grievance. "They tried to break me," she repeated, this time slower, as if forcing the words through a wall she had spent years building. Sophie didn't respond. She didn't need to. The look on Meghan's face had already said everything. This wasn't the voice of someone bitter. This was the voice of someone bruised by more than public scrutiny, someone broken by the very institution that had once welcomed her with a smile. Meghan began to speak of briefings, daily ones, she said. Notes passed along. Observations logged. They told me how to sit, how to smile, how long to pause before answering a question, she whispered. And then, when I followed every rule, they said I was cold, calculated, untrustworthy. Her words didn't rise in volume, but their weight crushed the space between them. Sophie later admitted, it wasn't what she said, it was how quietly she said it, like she didn't want the trees to hear. What struck Sophie most were the implications of surveillance, not in the way the public imagines, through cameras or clicks, but through whispers. Meghan claimed there were eyes on her every moment, not just from the press, but from within. I was being measured constantly, she said, and the scale was rigged. She made no accusations outright, but there were hints, shadowed references to a family member who was always kind in public, but ruthless behind closed doors. She smiled for every camera, Meghan said. Sophie was left shaken. Not just because of what she heard, but because of what she felt. I had never seen someone so composed fall apart like that, she later shared. Meghan's poise, so often criticized as performative, was now cracked wide open. And through those cracks came a flood of pain so real, Sophie couldn't look away. The woman who had been dismissed as a disruptor, a diva, a manipulator, was now weeping before her, reduced to someone who simply couldn't carry it anymore. In that garden, all the titles and formalities dissolved. Meghan wasn't the Duchess. Sophie wasn't the Countess. They were just two women, one trying to make sense of her suffering, the other struggling to hold the weight of it. For Sophie, it was the first time she questioned not just the institution's methods, but her own complicity in its silence. I had defended them, she admitted, and now I was wondering what else I never saw. But even as emotions ran high, Meghan revealed something that Sophie never expected, something that left her speechless. As the garden fell silent, Meghan pulled out something she had kept hidden for years, a letter, unsent, unread, unspoken, and Sophie was the first and only person to ever see it. What did the letter say, and why did Meghan never deliver it? There was no warning, no preface, just a pause in the conversation. And then Meghan reached into her coat and carefully pulled out a folded, weathered envelope, its edges softened with time, the ink slightly faded. She held it for a long moment in her hand, as if unsure whether to go through with what she was about to do. Then she passed it to Sophie, saying quietly, I wrote this to Catherine. Because what lay in that envelope wasn't just ink on paper, it was everything Meghan had never said aloud. A confession, a wound, a final, unspoken plea for understanding. According to Sophie, the letter was raw and painfully honest. It didn't accuse, it explained, it didn't demand, it revealed. In it, Meghan wrote about her earliest moments inside the royal family, how she'd tried to navigate the unfamiliar rules, the strange silences, the rehearsed smiles. She wrote about Catherine not with bitterness, but with aching clarity. She admitted to feeling intimidated, uncertain, even envious at times, not because of who Catherine was, but because of how easily she seemed to belong. You looked like you'd been born for it, Meghan wrote. and I was always trying to earn space in a room that was already yours." She went on to describe how missteps turned into headlines, and how kindness, when it came, often felt performative, filtered through protocol. But the letter wasn't an attack. It was an offering. Meghan described wanting to connect, to find something real beneath the royal titles. She confessed moments of loneliness so profound, she questioned whether she had made a mistake stepping into the firm at all. "There were nights I cried," she wrote, "and I didn't even know what for. Just a feeling that I was vanishing, piece by piece." And at the end of the letter, a line that broke even Sophie's composure: "I wanted to be your sister, but maybe I was always just the guest." Meghan told Sophie, with quiet resignation, that she never sent the letter because she was convinced it would be misunderstood. "I thought she'd never believe it came from my heart," she said. Or worse, that she'd think it was a strategy. Sophie didn't argue. She knew enough about royal life to understand how motives were always questioned, how emotion was often weaponized against those who dared to feel too deeply. In that moment, Sophie finally saw the entire picture, a woman caught between the truth she knew and the perception she couldn't control. And perhaps that's why, when Meghan asked whether she'd done the right thing in keeping the letter, Sophie reportedly replied, "Some letters are written for healing, not delivery." A sentence that carried both comfort and tragedy, because it acknowledged the harshest truth of all, that some bridges are meant to be built but never crossed. But just as Meghan began to open up, a chilling shift in tone changed everything, and Sophie realized this wasn't just about the past. Before walking away, Meghan turned to Sophie and left her with a final sentence, short, deliberate, and dripping with implication. Sophie says, it still echoes in her mind. They haven't stopped. What or who was she talking about? The entire tone of the garden shifted. What had been vulnerability transformed into something colder, sharper, as though Meghan had put her emotional armor back on with a single breath. Sophie noticed it instantly, the flicker of steel behind the calm, the kind of composure that doesn't come from peace, but survival. Meghan's eyes no longer shimmered with grief. They burned with quiet warning. And then came the words that Sophie still hears when she closes her eyes. They haven't stopped. It wasn't said with fear. It was said with certainty. And that made it all the more chilling. There was no need to ask who they were. The weight of that statement lingered in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Sophie's account of that moment carries the gravity of someone who's walked the halls of royal power long enough to know what's said in public rarely matches what happens behind closed doors. Her voice, once measured, betrays a trace of unease when she recalls Meghan's final moments in the garden. Meghan didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Her final glance, composed yet eerily detached, spoke volumes. Sophie reflected later. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. Awareness of being watched, of being documented, of living under the shadow of a system that measures loyalty in silence and punishes transparency with exile. And then, Meghan added something else, something Sophie hadn't expected. Just as she was about to walk away, she stopped, turned, and said, "Tell them. They can't silence everything." 6 words, but they carried centuries of weight. It wasn't a threat. It was a reckoning, a reminder that even in the most controlled institutions, not every truth can be buried, not every voice can be managed, and not every narrative belongs to the crown. There are those now who believe Meghan was speaking not just of past surveillance, but ongoing interference and invisible but present pressure still echoing in her life. Whispers of unofficial briefings, subtle manipulation, and power structures that don't need titles to operate. Sophie, once the quiet loyalist, suddenly found herself carrying a message she didn't ask for and couldn't ignore. A message that transformed her from witness to reluctant messenger. But even after that cryptic message, Sophie had one more revelation to share, something deeply personal and heartbreakingly honest. For years, Sophie held her silence. But after that meeting, something inside her changed. And now, she faces a question no royal ever wants to answer: should loyalty to the crown come at the cost of truth? What began as a quiet storm brewing beneath her royal composure became a flood Sophie could no longer contain. At first, she told herself it was a one-time conversation, that Meghan's pain belonged to Meghan, but the weight of those words, the emotion in that garden, and the cryptic final message, "They haven't stopped," clung to her. And in the days that followed, Sophie found herself haunted not just by what she'd heard, but by what it meant for the institution she had defended her entire adult life. She had seen too much, and now she knew too much. "There are things," she would later admit, "I wish I didn't know." But wishing wouldn't undo the burden. Silence would only deepen it. The palace, sensing the tension, didn't stay passive. Quiet suggestions became subtle warnings. Aides reportedly reminded her to be mindful of commentary. The message was clear: maintain the image, preserve the unity, bury the emotion. And for a while, Sophie tried. She kept her head down. But the truth had already begun to chip away at her resolve. It wasn't just about Meghan. It was about a pattern pain hidden behind pageantry, wounds covered in protocol. Sophie had spent years being the monarchy's quiet stabilizer. But now, she could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. To stay silent would be to endorse that pain, and she couldn't do it anymore. In a moment of vulnerability cloaked in strength, she chose to speak, not in a tabloid, not on a talk show, but in her own words, on a platform that felt safe enough to carry the weight of what she needed to say. "I witnessed too much pain to pretend I didn't," she shared. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't an exposé. It was a release, a reckoning with what it means to be royal and human. And her words carried farther than anyone expected, because Sophie's decision didn't just shake palace halls, it stirred something deeper. It cracked open a space for others, voices long silenced, perhaps waiting for a sign to begin stepping forward. And just as the dust began to settle, the world learned there was one more person involved, someone listening from afar, and perhaps waiting to speak next. What if the garden meeting wasn't as private as Meghan and Sophie believed? An insider now claims a third party overheard everything, and what they might reveal could blow the story wide open. Whispers are rising from within palace walls, and they all point to one unsettling possibility. The garden wasn't as empty as it seemed. A former royal groundskeeper, speaking on condition of anonymity, has come forward with a chilling detail he was working nearby that day. Hidden by hedges, he wasn't close enough to be seen, but close enough to hear fragments. What he heard, he says, matched exactly what Sophie later recounted in her now viral interview. But here's where things take a darker turn. The palace's official logs from that afternoon, including security assignments and staff routes, were allegedly redacted in a recent internal audit. Redacted, as if someone wanted that moment, that meeting erased from official memory. Why? Some believe it wasn't a coincidence, that someone inside the royal establishment had anticipated the conversation, that Meghan's outreach, however quiet, triggered alarms, and that Sophie, unknowingly, walked into a meeting that was already being watched. A chilling thought has begun to circulate among insiders. Surveillance. Not digital, personal, human, embedded within the very grounds of the estate. It wouldn't be the first time the firm moved to control its narrative. But if true, this wasn't just damage control, it was preemptive containment. Sophie herself has now admitted to a growing unease. In a private conversation reportedly leaked to a close aide, she confessed, "It may not have just been between us after all," a sentence heavy with implication. Because if Meghan's most vulnerable moment was heard by someone else, someone not meant to hear it, then nothing about that garden meeting was sacred. Nothing about that letter, those tears, those final words of defiance, remained untouched by the machinery of royal protection and control. It reframes everything, not just what was said, but how quickly the narrative began to shift, how carefully it was responded to, and how fast the silence was broken. Now, the question isn't whether Meghan and Sophie shared a powerful moment. The question is, who else was listening and why? Because if even the most private confessions can no longer remain private within palace walls, what does that say about the future of trust inside the monarchy? So where does this leave the royal family? What happens when truth, pain, and power collide behind palace gates? What began as a private moment between two women may become the most revealing chapter in the royal family's modern history. As trust fractures and secrets unravel, one thing is clear: there is no going back. The story was meant to end in silence. A garden meeting, a moment of vulnerability. Two women caught in the crosswinds of duty, expectation, and unspoken pain. But Sophie Wessex chose not to bury what she witnessed, and now the echo of that choice has thundered through palace walls and into public consciousness. Meghan has not spoken publicly since the interview aired, but the absence of her voice only sharpens the edge of the words Sophie shared. Every line has been dissected, every pause scrutinized. The world isn't just watching, they're questioning. Who else knew? What else has been hidden? And above all, why now? The palace responded with the kind of statement that says everything and nothing, carefully worded, impeccably vague. The family remains focused on unity and service. Not a denial, not a defense. A shield behind which the institution now hides, hoping the storm will pass. But this storm isn't like the others. It's not tabloid-driven, nor fueled by scandal alone. It's rooted in emotion, trust, betrayal, and the audacity of one royal to finally speak. Public opinion has fractured. Some see Sophie's honesty as long overdue, a breath of fresh air in a family that suffocates under secrecy. Others question her timing. Why now, after so long? Was it courage? Was it guilt? Or something far more calculated? The speculation has become a wildfire, drawing in voices from across the globe. Analysts, commentators, even former palace staff, who now feel emboldened to hint at what they witnessed but were too afraid to name. Inside the firm, the mood has reportedly shifted. Whispers of internal divide are growing louder. Tensions once dismissed as gossip are now treated as warnings. There's no consensus, only unease. The power once held by silence is cracking. Meghan, though silent in speech, has not remained still. Her public movements, engagements, and strategic appearances have become statements in themselves. Her story is no longer being written by others. It's evolving on her terms. Quietly, purposefully. And now, one question looms larger than all the rest. Who will speak next? What other truths remain buried in royal courtyards, private residences, handwritten letters never sent? Because the moment Sophie broke ranks, she didn't just tell her truth, she gave permission. Permission for others to stop whispering, to stop hiding, to bring forward the unseen. One meeting, one letter, one sentence that changed everything. In the end, it may not be the crown that shapes the monarchy's future, but the voices it tried hardest to ignore. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.